What if I told you that a girl with no computer could learn how to code? And what if I told you that her teacher could be a grandmother who never went to college? The similarities between a knitting pattern and a computer program are stunning. Knitting uses the same type of loops, conditions, and concepts of functions as a computer language. Knits and pearls are essentially the zeros and ones of computer programming, and when used in infinite combinations, can create as much variation as any code. Learning to knit, then, is a self-obvious stepping stone to learning to code. Girls interested in STEM are often told that they inherited a male brain. Technical skills are not seen as part of a woman's feminine legacy. And yet, Ada Lovelace, the first computer programmer, was a woman. Tasks traditionally labeled as women's work are complex and important and hold many of the same technical challenges as anything that men do. This is why we created Need to Code. Need to Code is aimed at showing that computing is much more a state of mind than it appears. It's a way of organizing one's thoughts, and it is much more a direct descendant of traditional skills than just a computer and a screen. This philosophy is what Need to Code seeks to impart. Computing without a computer, computing as a tradition. Need to Code is aimed at showing that the same logical thinking required for coding is the same as those required for knitting. It reinforces connections between generations of women, encouraging them to see themselves not only as domestic agents, but also as agents of change. It's about bringing multiple generations together and showing how an ancient skill can be used to teach a 21st century skills. One of the main reasons given for the few women in tech is the lack of female role models. This is true. According to a research by McKinsey called Women in the Workplace, it found that 36% of women, only 36% of women enter tech every year, but only 17% are in senior positions. The stats get even worse if you look at women of color, where only 17% enter tech every year, but only 3% are in senior positions. But what better role models do young girls need than their mothers and grandmothers? Women they already adore, women who already have an influence in them. In fact, according to a research by GTI Media and Ernst & Young, it found that over 54% of the students interviewed said that their parents tried to influence their choice of course or career. What was even more interesting, it was that the students actually didn't mind. They thought that actually 66% said that was the right thing for parents to do. It is all well and good for us to create coding clubs in every corner of the world. But if we exclude the women, the grandmothers, the mothers, we may not be able to close the gender gap in tech as quickly as we'd hope. They may not have computer science degrees, but through Need to Code, we can teach them the basic of computing and thereby equipping them to basically encourage the girls to consider computing as a career. Earlier this year, we embarked on a pilot of Need to Code in South Africa. We introduced 100 young girls from previously disadvantaged communities to Need to Code. We had grandmothers volunteering their time to teach the girls how to knit. What was more interesting for us was that the kids who started learning coding through Need to Code actually performed better when they started learning code when they graduated to learn Python and Java than the kids who started coding through a PC. What was different was that they spent more time understanding the computer science fundamentals, and most importantly, paying attention to detail. How do pilots learn to fly? Pilots don't just jump on a plane and fly right away. They land on a flight simulator. By the time they get on a plane, they have learned how to deal with all the potential crises they could face while on air. Well, Need2Code works in a similar fashion. It serves as a simulator, but for coding. Imagine what this means for the 90% of people in the developing world who do not have access to a computer or the internet. In fact, only 38% of the global population own a computer. This isn't just about the girls. Most of us in this room cannot imagine how our lives would be like if we didn't have access to technology. But for the majority of poor people living in the developing world, access is their biggest challenge. Lack of infrastructure, connectivity, and of course, the economics plays a very big role. By thinking differently about computing and creating simulators for coding, we remove the biggest barrier the majority of poor people have to learning how to code, the computer. By less than $5, a child could learn how to code. That's how much it costs to buy a yarn and a needles. In summary, I spoke about how pilots don't just jump on a real plane and fly right away. They learn on a simulator. Need2Code serves as a simulator, but for coding. Before that, I spoke about how influential parents are when it comes to the path their children choose to follow. We cannot focus on the children alone. We need to include the parents in the process, the mothers, the grandmothers. At the start, I posed two questions. What if a girl with no computer could learn how to code? And what if her teacher could be a grandmother who never went to college? Knitting is a way to change things. It could increase the number of girls in tech, and who knows, maybe even lead to more boys knitting. I encourage you today to join me in supporting or starting a Need2Code club in your community and equipping children who would have never had the opportunity to code, and we can together break the cycle of disadvantage. Thank you.